If I'm going to eat, let's say 2 grams per kilogram of body weight protein, and I'm not eating multiple meals, maybe I'm eating 2 or 3 meals per day, I'm certainly going to be eating more than the 30 gram threshold that was thrown around for a long time, that we can only assimilate 30 grams of protein per meal. Should I just not worry about that? Some of it is going to go towards the thermic effect of food. Some of that might be converted into glucose, of all things, through gluconeogenesis. So should I worry about this 30 gram cutoff? Because I think balancing the 1.6 gram per kilogram body weight threshold with number of meals, with the need to exercise and work and live my life and sleep, et cetera, pretty soon you run into bottlenecks where you just can't do it all, or you're spending so much time trying to focus on it all.
You can't optimize all the things at the same time.
You'd lose your mind and your body. So what is necessary in terms of frequency in if one is getting enough protein? And then tied into that question, is there any reality to this idea that if you eat 1 meal per day, or you're fasting and then you eat, let's say 200 grams of protein in a single feeding, that you can assimilate more because you were sort of protein starved? Is that a real thing?
So most of the studies with protein are after a fast, because to assess it with stable isotope, you have to be in a steady state. So we haven't observed that. It doesn't appear that fasting really kind of allows you to assimilate more protein after a fast. So this gets into a core of one of the things I looked at in my PhD, which is, does protein distribution matter? Because most Americans get about 65 to 70% of their protein at dinner, right? Breakfast tends to be pretty minimal protein foods.
Do any cultures actually eat a big breakfast and not a big lunch and dinner? I get, we all heard that was ideal. We'll get into circadian timing in a little bit, but does anyone actually do that? Steak and eggs for breakfast and then taper off the rest of the day?
I know German culture tends to have a big breakfast, but it also tends to be like sugary foods and whatnot. As far as like teleologically, I'm actually not sure about that. So if you look at that, and then you consider that protein doesn't really have a storage mechanism, right? Like people will say, well, lean tissue is a storage mechanism. That's like saying a house is a storage facility for wood. If the house is made out of wood, you could get wood out of it, but that's not why you build the house, right? Like you're building the house out of a demand. Same thing for muscle tissue. There is a free pool of amino acids, but it's very, very small. So when you consider things like fat, which basically has unlimited storage capacity, carbohydrate, a relatively large storage capacity, you can store 400 or 500 grams of carbohydrate between your liver and muscles. And then protein, which almost has no storage capacity. The idea that, you could make up for a low protein at one meal by over-consuming at another meal didn't make sense to me. So one of the studies we did, and again, in rats, we took both groups were getting whey protein, so high-quality protein. They were getting the exact same amount of calories, exact same amount of, nitrogen, exact same macros. Everything was the same. The only difference was one group basically got kind of 3 meals of similar amounts of protein. Like dinner was a little bit bigger because we wanted to keep it somewhat similar to how people eat. But each meal was going to be over the threshold to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Whereas the other group, I constructed it so the first 2 meals of the day should not stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It should be under that threshold. And then the last meal was about 70% of their total daily protein. And so we had them eat those for 11 weeks. And I'll never forget this. This is how obsessive I became about it. Is there was 110 animals in this study, and I made all the diets, and I weighed out exactly every single meal for every single animal for 11 weeks. So I was in there at 6 a.m., I was in there at noon, and I was in there at 6 p.m.
I love it. That's a kind of PhD student that professors dream of. You must have been a dream student.
So at the end of 11 weeks, we looked at lean body mass, we looked at body fat, we looked at hind limb weights. We didn't really see differences in lean body mass, but what we did see was a difference in hind limb weights. It wasn't massive, but there was a significant difference in the size of the muscles of the hind limbs of these animals. And so it's interesting that there wasn't a difference in lean body mass. And what we found, at least with the liver, the animals that were eating one meal with really high protein actually had bigger livers. Not like a huge amount and not something that I would consider unsafe, but it was a statistically significant difference. And so to me, at least, like if I'm trying to explain like no difference in lean body mass, but a difference in these hind limb weights, maybe there's some like sequestering of, like that's fueling a little bit more protein synthesis of the splanchnic tissues rather than, because you're capping out skeletal muscle protein synthesis. And we do know that the splanchnic tissues are more sensitive or have a greater rate of protein synthesis per day. Like the rate of skeletal muscle protein synthesis in humans is about like 1% per day. So it takes like 100 days to turn over, skeletal muscle. Whereas like your entire gut, your entire GI will turn itself over in like 2 to 3 days, right? So really, and the liver also has a very high amount of protein synthesis, which is one of the reasons it's actually one of the most metabolically active organs. So all that to say, there's been one human study that showed something similar, and then there's been a couple others that didn't. And then in the intermittent fasting studies, which is maybe a good tool to look at compared to continuous feeding, one thing I will say is it looks like the 16-8 intermittent fasting style. There's been a couple studies with Grant Tinsley, and this is something I've changed my mind on as well. Grant Tinsley has done a couple studies where they used the 16-8 protocol. They had them train during their feeding window, and they had them eat, I think it was at least 3 protein-containing meals during 8 hours.
These are humans?
These are humans. Mm-hmm. And they saw no difference in lean body mass at the end of the study compared to people who were eating as many times as they wanted throughout the day. Now, if you look at some of the more extreme forms of fasting, like alternate day fasting or like 22-2 or 24, there are some studies where you do start to see differences in lean body mass. So my suspicion is, and I'm just guessing, so this is tenuous. My suspicion is probably if you're getting like 2 to 3 like high quality protein meals in a day, you're getting the vast majority of the benefits of protein. The most important thing is getting enough total. And then secondarily, trying to get, at least 2 or 3 meals with high quality protein in. But if you're going like pretty extreme with like alternate day fasting or, maybe only 1 meal a day, then I think there may be some effects on lean body mass. But again, these can be mitigated as well if you're doing, hard resistance training. Typically, that is the biggest lever in terms of lean body mass. Yes, protein distribution may make a difference, but I'm trying to put it in context so people don't feel like they need to go out and eat, 4 meals a day. But again, so what I would say is like some of the more milder forms of, time restricted eating appear to be fine for lean body mass. Now, the caveat is the following. One of the nice things about animal studies is when you consider if you want to have a high subject number, high level of control, and a long duration, it's pretty much your only option, right? So I've in our research review reps, I created a Venn diagram, which basically is like 3, circles crossing over. One is study duration, one is level of control, and the other one is subject number. And to get all 3 of those circles to cross over, it almost has to be in animals.
Right.
So
and reps, it's a newsletter or a book?
So it's our monthly research review.
Great.
So every month we review like 5 studies that come out in fitness and nutrition. Like we'll usually do at least 1 nutrition, 1 training, and 1 supplement per month.
We will put a link to where people can sign up. This is a sign up format. Great.
Yeah. So it's a subscription-based service. So basically, when people might look at like my study, well, why did you see a difference in muscle weights, whereas some of these other studies don't see a difference? I weighed out every single meal for 11 weeks. And keep in mind that 11 weeks in a rodent's lifespan is a really long time. That's about 1/8 of their total lifespan. So is it that there's no effect, or is it that the effect is relatively small and would take a really long time and very high level of control to see in humans? I don't know, but I think what I would say relatively confidently is if you're going to do like a 16-8 intermittent fasting, you're probably fine. Especially, and again, what is the goal, right? Like if you're a bodybuilder looking to be the most massive person you possibly can, or you're a football player, or you're in some field that having as much lean body mass as possible is really important for you, then I would say, well, you're not really gaining a whole lot by doing some form of time-restricted eating.
I think most of the people listening to this do not fall into that category.
Right.
I think most people want to maintain or lose weight. They'd like to perhaps add a little bit of quote unquote shape or muscle to specific areas of their body and lose body fat.
Right. And I think your normal forms of time-restricted eating are probably perfectly fine for that, right? And again, I don't want somebody to think, well, I do, alternate day fasting. There's no point to me resistance training because I'm going to lose muscle mass. No. You can still build muscle doing that. You just might not build as much muscle as you would if you were eating in a more traditional format. But if that's something that works for you and your goals, and especially if it's fat loss or controlling your calories, then again, it's about the hierarchy of what's important, right? So to answer your question, I do think that timing and frequency matters a little, not so much frequency, but distribution more so. So I think the distribution matters, but it's a much smaller lever than just getting enough total protein.